Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bob Ward from Microsoft, a principal architect here on the SQL team. Thank you so much for hanging with us here in the afternoon, whether you're online or here in person. It's been a long day, hasn't it? It's been a long couple of days. Lots of great stuff being announced here at Ignite, especially for the SQL team. You've probably seen some announcements for SQL Database and Fabric and SQL Server 2025, and been wondering yourself, what about Azure SQL Database? What about Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance and VM? And that's really the goal of our session here this afternoon. I'll be joined a little bit later from Mawasma Zaid to talk a little more about what's going on in Azure SQL Database world. And also at the very end, you'll want to hang for the very end, a great customer story for you about migrations to Azure. A couple logistics for you. We love talking to you, all your questions. We're going to reserve questions to be after the session. We can talk to you out in the hallway later. We have an amazing team at the Hub as well. So you're free to go to the Hub. It's still open, I think, till like 6 o'clock all day tomorrow. They can answer any question you have about things we're going to present today. So maybe based on the announcements you did hear, what a cool story now to see this. I never would dream, after 31 years in the company, that SQL would exist in all these form factors. Being in SQL Server 2025, the latest release, or even now in the Fabric, and of course in the cloud. If you're looking at this and wondering, that's a lot of options for me there, isn't there some consistency? There is. There is the same T-SQL language, the same engine powering this, the same set of tools. I can take the new Management Studio, yes, there's a new Management Studio, and I can connect to every one of these like this, consistently and unique to their experiences. I've got Copilot experiences now. I've got them in SSMS. I have them in Azure. I have them inside the Fabric. And of course, one thing you're going to see today is the great story of AI. We've been showing that story already at Ignite for Fabric SQL Database and also for SQL Server 2025. You're going to see it in this session for Azure SQL Database. And then what about the Fabric, the unified data platform? One thing that does unite us as a SQL family is mirroring. So we have, in this event, announced the general availability of being able to mirror Azure SQL Database into the Fabric, giving a really cool near real-time analytics experience. Also, we have the public preview of Azure SQL Managed Instance to mirror there as well. And really exciting that if you're on premises, we now have a private preview sign up for you to mirror your SQL Server on premises into Fabric. So if you're thinking about that unified story of the Fabric, you've got it. You've got the ability now, anywhere SQL exists, to go mirror, and Fabric SQL Database is already automatically mirrored. So we love the fact that SQL can be part of the integration of that incredible unified story. Let's start by talking a little bit about Azure SQL Database, and after Mawasma's done, I'll come back on and talk a little bit about Azure VM and Azure SQL Managed Instance. So if you're thinking and you're not sure about migrating into Azure, not sure where to land, we get this question all the time. Here's one way to look at it. You've got a database that you care a lot about, like a database. I don't have to do cross-database work. I don't have to do instance type of things with my SQL Server. It's really more just of a database that I need for an application. It's a perfect landing spot for you. One of the things that we're able to do because of how we deploy for you in this environment for Azure SQL Database is most of our latest cutting edge innovations can show up here first. AI is actually one of those. We've announced the native vector support as public preview in this space, and you're going to see that from Mawasma. So if you think about things like hyperscale, serverless technologies, all the great things that come with a scalable type environment as a developer, Azure SQL Database is a really great place to start. Now, one of the things we'd like to do is talk about AI. Who doesn't in this conference? We've got a really cool story because one of the things that we're proud of in our team is we're trying to make it a more practical story for you. Like, why would you really want to go do this with your data? And every time I've talked about AI over the last 7 or 8 months, naturally, here's what happens. I ask an audience, how are you doing AI? How's it working for you? What do you think? Their answer, I use ChatGPT. Don't blame you. It's a great technology. But I come back to this question for them, why would you use Gen AI with your database? So a couple little fundamentals, and I'll bring Mawasma on stage here. Number one, what you can do is take your data, talk to an AI model in a very secure way with SQL, and generate something called embeddings with your data, and store them in your database. Then if a prompt comes along for an application, you can generate embedding from that inside SQL, and then you get to compare these together. We call that a vector or similarity search. Then you can take the great SQL filtering capabilities you already know and love, and combine that together for what we call a hybrid search. You can stop there. You can just do great searching of your data, send results back to your application. But in a true RAG pattern form, you can take those results, add that to the prompt, to a language model, and get a really cool type of generated response from it. And you're going to see examples in a second from Mawazma for both of those things. Being able to do a vector search, a hybrid search, and then put those together in a full RAG application. So with that, I'd like to invite Mawazma Zaid to come on stage. Mawazma leads on our SQL team, all of our Azure SQL database program management and AI. Mawazma.
Thank you, Bob. So as Bob mentioned about all the latest advancements in it, so I wanted to start with some of the announcements that we have done recently in the space of developer and AI, because AI does not exist without your development toolkits and developer tools that you have access to. So the first thing I wanted to share, many of you already know, or if you don't know, we have a native JSON type now supported in Azure SQL database, all SKUs. We also have JSON aggregate, so I will show you an example of that in a second. We also have the latest SDK style projects, the MS SQL SDK style. How many of you use database with CI/CD? Some of you do. If you don't, please check this out. This is the latest and greatest. We just released the latest version of that. And then VS Code extensions. MS SQL extension actually got a brand new refresh this week or last week. And definitely check that out. All the release notes, all of that are available. So these are all the latest and greatest in terms of developers. We have invested a lot in this area. We want to make sure that you have the tools and the frameworks that you want to actually build these applications with. So now let's talk about AI ones, right? So we, a couple of weeks ago, announced the public preview of vector native type in Azure SQL Database. Again, the same functionality is coming to all flavors of SQL, SQL Database and Fabric, SQL Server 2025. You can natively store vector data in SQL. And then you can also do vector distance or vector functions. So again, I will show you an example in a few seconds. But your applications are not just only using T-SQL. You're using some kind of frameworks. So you might be using EF Core. So we have native support there. EF Core now natively understands the SQL native vectors type, and also JSON support is there. We also have LangChain and semantic kernel support. And if you want to do low-code, no-code vectorization of your data, you don't want to do anything with any of the coding languages, we have first-party support with Logic Apps as well. So again, all of these are available in our dev blogs with examples and samples, so definitely check that out. Last but not least, we're working on, if you're searching and looking for how to effectively do vector search and you're looking for the indexes, we have an index based on DiskNN coming soon. This is the same index that the Bing runs on. So Microsoft Bing actually uses DiskNN for all of the search. So it does billions of records in a few seconds. So we are actually building that inbuilt with SQL. So you will find vector search functions coming soon as well. Now, why do we talk about these AI applications when it is about the database, right? So in operational database, I truly believe, and our team truly believes, that you can do chatbots with almost any other vector data store today. But if you have transactional data coming in and you want to actually do going beyond the chatbot, you have to do natural language to SQL on structured and unstructured data. You can do that with SQL database vector support. In addition to that, you can do RAG patterns. So again, I will give you an example of a Contoso chatbot that we built for an insurance company that you can take for your examples and really build that with the support that's available today. Now let's see this in action. So it was a challenge that we had to build together a demo on in terms of a company called Contoso Insurance. This was a real scenario for a person in my team called Davide Mori. He writes a lot of our SQL. He is actually the PM for the vector support. And he was actually going to meet an insurance agent. So the insurance agent said, we talked to the insurance agent and we're like, if you're going to meet a customer, what do you want to know about that customer before going to that? So we envisioned this chatbot in this example. Let's say you are an insurance company. Something is happening. OK. Let's say you're an insurance company, and you really want to actually go ahead and talk to the customer, and you want to know all things about that customer before going. So this is the example of chatbot. We intentionally try to make it a little bit. So in this case, I am the insurance agent. I'll talk to this chatbot and say, hi, I'm going to meet John Doe later today. What can you tell me about that? So the chatbot comes back and actually says, we have two John Does. Which John Doe are you talking about? So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say, he's the one in Redmond. So then the chatbot will go in and actually find all of the information and summarize that for me, coming from the conversational history directly for that customer, and also their claims history about what have they done, what policies they have, and all of that. Now, if you have to do that today in SQL, can anyone of you tell me how quickly can you write that query? How many pages long that query would be to get to that data? You saw that this actually did it in like few seconds. So that's the beauty of using vector support and semantic searching built into SQL. And what's actually happening behind the scenes is this natural language query of learning about who is John Doe is getting converted to this SQL statement. So we're using natural language SQL as the first step. And then basically that goes to an AI model that converts that into the natural language, into the query that you're running. Now the next step is I'm going to go back and I want to learn more, right? So how was the premium change over the last 3 years? What are the different things this customer has particularly done? So I can go and talk more about and learn more about this customer, and it's very natural, very intuitive in a natural language way. So I'm going to talk about, since I'm going to meet this customer, what are the recent issues this person has? And it looks like that this person has a communication history of multiple calls they have done to the call center where they were not happy about a few things. And likely so, I found that they had premium increased a few times. And definitely, I can suspect that when I'm going to talk to them, they're going to talk about some decrease in the premiums and whatnot. So now I'm fully equipped to actually, with all the knowledge about this customer, and really go in and have that conversation with the customer. Now again, what is happening here? You have two pieces of things happening. So again, the summarization is happening. And also, how does this chatbot really knows that it has to find the history and actually summarize that for me? So what is happening here is it's really doing transactional or operational RAG. As soon as your communication history, let's say you called 5 minutes ago or 5 seconds ago, that data lands in the SQL database. And that gets converted into embeddings. And that embedding is what we're using in terms of vector support to find the closest to what you're searching for. And this is what we truly believe is a game changer. It's operational RAG. It goes beyond any of the existing databases that support vector support. Now, this is the data that is for this particular customer. You can see they have called multiple times. You can see there are many spelling mistakes because the call engine is actually typing all the data. Now, if you, again, have to search something similar in this data, you will not find that very accurately, right? There's something happening on the screens, but hopefully you're still with me. I'm particularly looking for the premium increases, and this is how it actually goes and finds that data. And in the background, what really is happening is I have this stored procedure called find communication history by subject. It takes any text. That text gets converted into embedding, and then it's basically mapped against all the data that's stored. And how do we do that? We have a functionality called SP invoke REST endpoint. This went GA last September. With this capability, you can actually call any REST endpoint that you have access to. In this case, what we are calling is an Azure OpenAI model. And that model actually converts the text into embeddings, and then you can get the distance between the two. And the way to do the distance is using the new vector type. Here we are defining that as a vector 1536. That's the dimension of how we're converting the text. Right now, that's the one we support. If you have like larger embeddings, larger dimensional vectors, please come and talk to us. In this case, then we use vector distance. So vector distance is a function, again, built into the T-SQL. We actually support all three: cosine, dot product, and Euclidean. Cosine is the most common one, which customers are currently using, which finds a similarity between two texts. Now, if you're a customer and you're thinking about, like, oh, this is a lot of personal data that this person had access to. So again, the beauty of this thing is that it is built into the same SQL engine that you know and love. So for example, in this case, if I look in this database, I actually have 3 John Does. But since I was the agent and I only had access to 2 of those, the chatbot actually takes care of the row-level security of the user who's accessing the chatbot. And it can even do data masking. In this case, you can see the email address is basically masked. So everything that you know about SQL security stays the same when it comes to vector or AI. If you are worried about what your end users will have access to when it comes to chatbots, make sure that you provide the access correctly, and then the same will go through the vector search as well. You can go further. You can use ledger tables. How many of you know about ledger? No one? OK, one person. Oh, that's the engineer. OK. So ledger is a capability that we introduced some time ago. This is basically append-only, so you can really make sure that all the chat that happens, you can create the table as ledger. And all of that will be stored as append-only. Nobody can actually go and update that data. And you can even have a full record of what's happening. So this is the kind of the capability that you can further make sure that the system is super, super secure when it comes to chatting with your data and really doing transactional or operational RAG on your data. Now, going back to the chatbot scenario, this was good. Now, what should I do with this customer, right? Now, this is a question nobody can answer yet, right? Like this has to go beyond what is already in the data. So now what we're doing is a RAG pattern where we are actually taking all the history of this data and sending it to OpenAI model and asking it to summarize that for me. And this model actually has more understanding about the services the insurance company is offering. So as you can see, the model came back and said that probably this person should use the new safety score capability. And now that we know that this is something that can help the customer, we are adding it into the memory of the semantic kernel library here, and then that can be used for all future customers as well. So now your future conversations about other customers will become more intelligent. So what you saw right now was an end-to-end scenario of an insurance and enterprise AI solution built upon the known security of SQL database with AI capabilities built in. And I truly believe that bringing AI to data is easier than to bring data to AI. So that's why we have built all of these vector capabilities and all of these things within the engine with the built-in security and the T-SQL that you already know about. Now, many of you are thinking about building a chatbot that is for, let's say, 5 users, 10 users. What about the scale, right? What about thinking about the future where your database is growing and everything is actually getting larger or bigger? What do we do now? So there we have the solution of Azure SQL Hyperscale. And Hyperscale is, the name is a little bit confusing where it is about starting with 0. So you can start with a database with just, let's say, 1 table and 1 row, and it can grow as your data grows. It is the latest and greatest. You can go to the AKMSHS page. A lot of our latest capabilities come to Hyperscale first. And you can learn more about how to actually do kind of scaling on your data. So let's see that in action. What we've announced actually recently in last 2 weeks, these are the 3 things. So Hyperscale previously had a limit of 100 terabytes. So we have increased that to 128 terabytes. There was somebody at the booth today who said they want 200 terabytes. So please come and talk to us if you need even larger databases. But the theme that we have for Hyperscale, it's larger, faster, and cost-effective. So these are the 3 things we are investing a lot when it comes to Hyperscale. We have the larger size available now. We also have the log rate. So it has increased now to 150 megabits per second, which is the industry leading. Right now, no other database actually provides this level of log transaction rates. And last but not least, if you want to recover your databases from one or the other, you want a faster time to it, you can really use this new capability called continuous priming. And let me show this to you in action. Some of the new announcement again in this, if you are thinking about reliability and redundancy, definitely look into the GeoZone redundant storage. We have the new capability there in all regions. It's coming to all of them by end of November, which should be soon, and you should be able to get that access. Many of you have told us that it's expensive. So we have really taken that into account, and we've reduced the price up to 41% cheaper for your backup storage. So this really helps you to be more cost effective. As I talked about the larger, faster, and cost effective, we are really working on all of our features across the SQL database offering to make sure that it is cheaper and the most cost effective for you. Now, as we looked into the last example, so let's building upon that, the insurance chatbot actually suggested to use the safety score. If some of you already use this kind of device, you know this device actually creates a lot of data, like millions of records. And in order for a database to keep up with this kind of data coming in trillions of records, Hyperscale is the right choice. So in this case, we are using the Hyperscale database for the same chatbot. And here you can see we have increased the limit, and this database actually has gone to the limit of 128 terabytes. This is a neat capability called DB Watcher. Many of you, if you don't know, definitely check out. We announced that some time ago. This is built into Azure portal. It can go down to particular minute, hour. You can even look at the queries that are causing any issues for your database, and then you can see here that the size at which the data is increasing. And to really prove you that this can scale to that limit, I'm just going to run this query to see the size of this database. And let's see how many zeros. And if you can guess, it is 20 zeros. So this is 1 trillion rows in this table. And you saw this whole chatbot was actually built on that, and that is the speed with what Hyperscale kind of performs with the latest and greatest storage and compute. It's re-architected for the cloud. Now, the last thing I want to mention in this scenario is about the throughput rate. So as the data is coming in, so there was this size of the data, but the second thing is the speed at which the transactions are coming. You want to make sure that they are actually coming in at a consistent rate as well. So this yellow line, again, DB Watcher is showing it's up to 150 megabits per second. That means as soon as your data is coming in from your app or any of the systems, it will land in your data and will be available for any of the systems or your applications, chatbots, whatever you're building as fast as possible. Now, one other question customers ask us, what about the read scale? So for example, you have an application that is on your primary, which is doing most of the writes. But you want to have your business users access to the same data, but you don't want that workload to impact your writes. So we have this capability called named replicas. You can have up to, I believe, 30 replicas per hyperscale database. And you can actually go in very simple to set up. You can set up as provision and create those. Now, you can completely isolate your writes and reads by doing that. And by doing that, what you are providing is the scale-out capability. So that means your write can completely write to your primary, and all your replicas can be used for, let's say, your marketing department or some other team who's actually accessing this data for read purposes. And this is how it will show up in the portal. So they are all individual databases. You can connect to them. You can do almost everything that you can do on your primary as well. Now, the last thing is about a scale. So far, all of this, the things that I talked about, is a single database, right? Single database, scaling up, scaling out. What about you if you have hundreds of databases? How do you actually manage that? So we have this capability called Elastic Pools. It went GA recently. And with this capability, what you can do is to actually, literally what the name says, you can put these databases into a pool, and you can manage the resources across them. And you can decide which gets what. For example, if you're an ISV and you have a sales or ticketing season coming up, and you know that it's a ski season and that resort gets a lot of demand, you can actually give them more power to actually take more resources from the rest of your pool. And as you can see, you can get up to 60% savings in your total price of those databases. And just announcing this as well, we have Azure SQL Hyperscale Elastic Pools in GA, and you can learn about this in AKS MS HSEP video or HSCP. You can find a lot of details around that. So with that, this kind of completes the picture of your known familiar T-SQL system with the ability of doing vector search on top of that, with the built-in security that you have known for decades, that we have built, and we really stand by it with the scale of the future. So you can start from a single database and go to hundreds of databases or thousands of databases, knowing that Azure SQL will stand for the future for what you're building. Last but not least, if you want to try out all these features and really add something to your resume, for example, there is a new credentials that we have just launched. You can go to this path. You will go through the whole learning path of learning about all these latest features. You will actually get a lab to practice them as well. And by the end of it, if you pass, definitely good luck for that, because we have put some very hard questions in there. If you go through that, you will get a certification that is Microsoft official as well. So definitely check that out. With that, I would like to call back Bob to talk about the rest of the Azure SQL ecosystem in terms of MI and VM.
Awesome. Thank you, Muasma. If you haven't learned what an AI guru she is, you now saw some action of that. That's just a small taste of the talents that Muasma and her team has. So you saw the Azure SQL database story. I love some of the themes she just said when it comes to AI for SQL. We're pretty serious about this. That is enterprise AI ready and bring AI to your data. As you saw some of those demonstrations, as we've demonstrated this event before, remember, everything we're doing in SQL is secured by the SQL engine. You decide the permissions of exactly how these models are accessed, and the models themselves don't run in our engine. We actually access through REST APIs. So we talked about Azure SQL Database. Let's kind of finish off a little bit today in our segment, and we got a great customer story for you to talk a little about Azure Virtual Machine and Managed Instance. You know, Azure Virtual Machine has been tried and true proven to be a method to migrate to the cloud very quickly. It also gives you the most control over your SQL migration. You pick the version of SQL, you pick the operating system. Of course, there's more for you to manage there, but one of the things we want to do is make sure you have the power of what you need for these virtual machines. Now, you may have seen us talk before, maybe even over the last year, about different virtual machine sizes, like the D series and E series to power your SQL applications. We have a new public preview from the Azure team called the FX series, a version 2 of that. The reason why it could be important for you is that look at the horsepower behind this in terms of I/O throughput, in terms of IOPS, in terms of storage performance, and even CPU performance. So if you're thinking about those choices to migrate to Azure, and you're thinking, I don't know if there's enough power there from, say, like the E series that you need, go take a look at this public preview for the new FX V2 series. It could be what you need to actually migrate your workload in SQL Server on premises into the cloud. Let's talk about Azure SQL Managed Instance. So remember, I talked about Azure SQL Database being this choice about I just need a database. I want the latest innovations. And I just mentioned Azure VM as a lift and shift with maximum control. But what if you're okay with the versionless SQL Server? You'd like to go take advantage of the platform as a service capabilities, but I don't know if Azure Database is right for me because of a couple of reasons. Number one, I have multiple databases. I have cross-database queries I need to do. These databases are related to each other. I have instance-level requirements, SQL agent jobs, replication, distributed transactions. Like an entire SQL server I need to manage in the cloud, but I want to take advantage of managed services. And that's where Azure SQL Managed comes into play. Managed Instance, though, has a lot of great announcements that we're doing here at this event. A lot of people don't realize some of the great capabilities, so let's kind of go through a couple of those. One of those is what we call next-gen general purpose service tiers. So just like an Azure SQL database, you choose an option for how you're going to deploy this instance. Options are general purpose and business critical. So for general purpose, it's been a great choice for our customers, but there's been a few things they've asked for us. Number one is I need more than 100 databases, because in many cases, this is a consolidation play. I'd like to take a couple of different SQL servers, put them in one managed instance, and actually go up to like 100 databases, but I need more than that. So we have up now 500 databases that you can do in a managed instance. In addition, customers have said to us, I need more vCores, actually to support my workload. I need more storage. I need larger storage, and I need better storage performance. So you see here some of the things we're offering now. Now, one of the key features of this is not just getting you faster performance, but more control over your performance. So traditionally, what you've had to do to get more IOPS is add more compute, which means you're kind of paying for more. So now what you do is you can customize that. You can actually choose your IOP performance independent of the compute you're choosing for a managed instance service tier. This is what we call the next-gen general purpose service tier, and it's in public preview. Very popular. A lot of our customers felt like they needed to move to business critical service tier to get their performance needs. Now they can choose this next-gen option, which can be a cost-effective option for you to deploy in managed instance. So that's one great feature I think you should look at for managed instance. The next one is something called instance pools. Now, in fairness, we announced this as a public preview a little bit of time back, and it really kind of lost momentum with our customers. I'm excited to tell you today at Ignite, we're announcing the general availability of these. You're like, okay, well, you just talked about next gen. Like, why would I want to do this? Consider this scenario. You've got some SQL servers in your environment that run like 2 vCores, like smaller SQL servers. Well, before, and with the next gen, you can only do 4 cores as the smallest you can do. Well, why would I over-provision 4 cores when I only need 2? So what you can do now is provision what's called a pool, and then you go deploy instances in this pool. Couple of advantages. Number one, again, you only need 2 vCores now. Well, you can do it now with 2 vCores. But look at that thing on the left-hand side, rapid deployment. This is really critical. Imagine your environment for your organization. You're going to set up a managed instance pool for, say, 6 instances of smaller cores, 2 or 4, something of that nature. You deploy this pool, and now, within minutes, you can deploy any of these smaller cores inside that actual pool itself. So a great way for you to plan with your organization to set myself up for success for rapid on-demand deployment of an instance, which was not possible before until we have instance pools. That is now generally available for you to deploy in Azure. Okay, so next gen and instance pools, what's next? So many organizations I've talked to need a managed disaster recovery solution. They're struggling to actually create a DR solution that they can count on is available when a disaster occurs. So now, a cooperation between SQL Server 2022 and Azure SQL Managed Instance, you can set up this what's called link feature for managed instance. It could be used for migration purposes, but it could be used for this. You could use it for disaster recovery. Before, we only supported like a one-way stream. You could just like fail over to your MI. All of a sudden, you could do it. You kind of restore back to SQL 2022. Now, with the power of distributed availability groups, you can have your managed instance as a failover partner. This is pretty cool. You could set up your SQL 2022, synchronize it with managed instance. We'll ship log changes like a DAG we would do on-prem for you, right? Or you would set up yourself. And then you could fail over you needed to managed instance. Well, if you got your SQL Server 22 back up and running as in a disaster, you synchronize back and then you fail back to SQL Server 2022. Many customers have told us they need what's called an exit strategy. Not because they want to leave the cloud, because they have to prove to, say, a government or agency that they could if they had to for certain reasons. So this is a great popular option for our customers. Excited to see this now generally available for Azure SQL Managed Instance. And then, well, Osmo just talked about vector searching, right? Native vector types, vector distance searching. Remember my initial slide, ground to cloud to fabric? So now, you can do a vector search everywhere SQL exists. With SQL 2025 private preview, you can do it there. We have it in Fabric SQL Database. She showed it for Azure SQL Database. And now with Managed Instance, we have a private preview sign up for you to do this on a Managed Instance. So you can now do AI anywhere you need, where SQL lives. And again, the great story for you as a developer is it is the same T-SQL language powering across all these SQL deployment options. So if you're in a situation where you have to deploy to many different places, look at this now. You can do it in a consistent way anywhere SQL actually exists. And you're like, well, Bob, this is all really great and cool, but I want to see some demos. Well, I'll show you in a second about that one. Before I show you that slide for demos, what about this? Customers have told us, Bob, we need to go try out a managed instance for upgrade. I can't afford to go pay a cost for a managed instance to do a proof of concept for my business. So now we have a free trial for up to 12 months. So now you can deploy a managed instance up there, try a proof of concept for your business, even try a migration from SQL Server up into this managed instance with a free trial up to 12 months, and go try it out and see where the managed instance is going to serve your needs, or even go test out the different ways your organization is going to go migrate your app and all the different scripts and things you do to manage your business. So check that out, free trial for Managed Instance. But again, I want to see this in action. So this is what you could do at Ignite. You could do a shameless tease. Sorry. So you have to come tomorrow morning to see me at the theater. Tomorrow morning at 9:45 in the theater session, I will be showing off all these different type of functionalities for Azure SQL Managed Instance, including mirroring, vector searching, instance pools, and Managed Instance link for disaster recovery. So tomorrow morning in the hub, doing a theater session to show you all these demonstrations. Well, it's really cool to hear from Microsoft about great announcements we're making at a conference, but I would love to hear from a customer that's gone down this journey. So what I'd like to do now is invite John Tracy from Thomson Reuters and Tim Nabbs from Microsoft. John.
Hi, Bob.
Great to have you. Thanks for coming. Tim,
you're welcome,
thanks for
Bob.
coming. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And the reason I like this kind of type scenario is that I can sit here and bloviate all day long on what I think is cool about our technology. But what I'd rather do is hear from somebody who's been through this process. So John, I think you've got a pretty cool story to tell us about how Thomson Reuters, they made this migration move. Why did you do that, and what kind of outcomes did you see it for it?
Sure, Bob. Well, we started out in AWS hosting an application that had 17,000 databases, and we had to spread those across a lot of SQL servers in AWS. There was a lot of support that was required to do that, and a lot of time that was required to do that. So what we decided we needed to do, mostly to get over to Azure Virtual Desktop, which was the key component of our application. We wanted to move from Citrix to Azure Virtual Desktop. And as part of that, we wanted to use the Azure SQL Managed Instance as our SQL Server backend. So that was our kind of our why we wanted to get over there. Our how was, of course, a big question for us because, moving that many databases, and especially to that many managed instances. At the time that we did our migration, the next gen managed instance wasn't available yet, so we could only do 100 databases per managed instance. So we're talking, over 200 managed instances that we had. Of course, we worked with our account team, and we were able to get some help from the migration factory inside of Microsoft.
So John, tell me a little bit, before we ask Tim a little bit that process, I'm interested to know why managed instance, why was that your choice to move from AWS? Yeah.
Absolutely. In AWS, we had to use the enterprise license to get the high availability that we needed. When we did our examination of the managed instance general purpose, we were able to use standard edition, from our enterprise agreement, we were able to use standard edition licenses to cover the licensing with our bring your own license. And the general purpose edition of managed instance provided us all the high availability that we needed, all the stability and scalability that we needed. So we were able to actually save millions of dollars by making this move to managed instance from what it costs us to host ourselves in AWS.
So one of the keys to MI you just mentioned here with general purpose is it's kind of like a failover cluster, right, in a way with low storage. So you had built-in high availability without setting this up yourself. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then zonal redundancy became an option for us too, which we also enabled when it became an option. And it is like a failover cluster underneath. Now, I've since learned there's a little availability group in the background there as well, too.
Absolutely, powering it, yeah.
Because whenever we need to scale up or scale down or make any changes like that, it brings up a nice little thing telling us what step we're in. And the step 3 always said seeding new databases. Well, I'm a DBA. I know what seeding new databases
Exactly,
means.
yeah, awesome.
So I think generally it's failing over like a failover cluster, but when I need to make a scaling move, it uses a little availability group technology in there to get me over to the new virtual cluster and keep my downtime almost to nothing.
So lots of databases, you need instances, but you need that platform as a service.
Yes.
Yes, that was kind of an appeal to you, right?
It was. It also helped us reduce our support costs.
Oh, really? Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We had full 24/7 support for all of our databases when we had them in AWS. And we have full 24/7 support for our databases in Azure. However, Microsoft is the primary responder to a certain set of problems that are on a managed instance. Any high availability issues, any corruption issues, which we haven't seen any, of course, and don't expect to see any. I have a small story about that. It is a good thing.
Yeah.
We brought some corruption with us over from AWS.
Oh, they were already corrupted.
They were already corrupted in AWS. We got to Azure, restored the databases, and we first checked DB that we did brought up some corruption. Well, guess who got to work on our corruption? The Microsoft people who wrote and run and developed SQL Server. There's no better person in the world that I want working on my corruption problem than somebody at Microsoft. And they were able to edit the page that was corrupt, restore us to no data loss, and move on. And we haven't had an issue since then. But as a DBA, my answer to corruption is go to your last backup. When you're in a managed instance, that might not be your answer. Right. So
that's a cool story as part of it, though.
Story.
Now, Tim, I've known you for a long time, deep SQL expert at Microsoft. It was a really cool story how this worked. Tell us a little bit about how you got engaged with John and Thomson Reuters, and what was your involvement to help with this process?
Yeah, so I am an architect as part of our migration factory, and our migration factory is set up to perform migration just like this. So we'll perform migrations for any customer out there free of charge. It's a scalable offering, and so John and the Thomson Reuters team worked with their account representative, and both groups were just great to work with. And so I got engaged and kind of came to understand not only the scale in which we need to perform this migration, but some intricacies. No one migration is ever the same as another one. And so in the waves in which we had to perform migration, you don't just perform migration of up to 20,000 databases one time. We do it in waves over across about 2 months. And so we would do it on the weekends. And so we had to develop a custom solution, an automated solution to perform the migration. So they would identify essentially groups of databases to move at a time, and we would have to actually go out, perform a lookup in AWS to find the backups. So for a given org that they would migrate, we'd have to go find all the backups for those. We'd have to transfer them over to Azure Storage, and then we'd start the restoration process to MI. However many MIs we were doing at the time using the log replay service.
Well, that's a pretty cool story, though, because you're able to use the native restore capabilities because
Exactly.
MI supports
Yep.
a backup and restore of actual SQL Server. That's pretty cool.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So, John, Tim is actually, I've known him for a very long time. Was that really nice to have a SQL expert that you could talk the same language with a little bit?
Absolutely. And the migration factory, a migration of this scale, to have experts working on that piece of bringing the data over and seeding it and loading it into the managed instance. We took over from your databases are online. That was our entry point to the go live for each wave. We just didn't have any worries about how the data was going to get there or that it was going to get brought online properly.
That's awesome.
And so it really freed us up to work the other parts of the application stack and to just make sure that our customers were going to have a good experience once we brought them online in Azure.
That's outstanding. So anybody here in the audience, online or here in the room, they may be thinking about this journey, not sure how to start. John, would you give any kind of advice to them on how to go do that?
Well, you got to work with your account teams. I mean, we had our ability to get involved with the factory by working with our account teams. Get your DBAs involved with these free managed instances. I know for myself, having a managed database server, my first experience was with RDS in AWS. It wasn't a real SQL server. There was all sorts of, it was a real SQL server, but the way that I was interfacing with it wasn't with native commands. There was all sorts of extra things I had to learn, all sorts of limitations I had. A managed instance is not that. It's a SQL server, just like any SQL server you have ever dealt with as a DBA. And I think that's one important thing. Get your DBAs in front of it, use that free time, and let them really experience what it is to run a SQL server hosted by Microsoft.
Easy learning curve.
It's a
Were
very
you able to test even like your scripts and various things you use to manage your servers?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And that free trial could be a way to go do some of those
Absolutely.
things, right? That's awesome. That's fantastic. John, thank you so much. Tim, now, if somebody's here in the audience wants to know, is there programs from Microsoft? Like if I wanted to get involved, I talked to my account team. Tell us more about your experiences and what you know about that.
Well, programs we certainly do have. So there's Azure Innovate. So whether you are looking to develop cloud native applications, advance your analytics capabilities, or just interject AI into your custom solutions, Azure Innovate can help with that. Then we have Azure Migrate and Modernize. So this is a way for you to migrate your applications to the cloud. And as we just demonstrated, our factory program, Migration Factory program, is the way to do that. So this is a free program, zero-cost program to work with Microsoft experts. And the way that you do that is to work with your account team to get a nomination to be able to work with us. So we don't care if it's one database or 20,000 databases. We are happy to help with that. And so we're actually expanding this program to include our partner ecosystem as well, to continue to be able to help our customers get their databases and their application to the cloud at scale if necessary. So then you have Azure Essentials, and this is just a way to elevate reliability. And our customers want to take advantage of everything that our Azure offerings have out there for them. And so to address this, they've launched Azure Essentials. And so this is a set of assets, tools, and partner training that's focused on customer outcomes. So they'll help with elevating security concerns, reliability, and performance concerns for you. So please check out the QR code on the screen to learn more about Azure Essentials, the new program.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you coming on. Great story to hear.
Bob.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you. I promise we didn't pay John to do this. No, really great story. When I heard that John was going to come do this, I'm like, what is John's story? When I heard about this migration to AWS, I'd never heard of something of that scale, moving that many databases. And managed instance, as you saw, was a great solution for him. Well, I hope you've enjoyed what we talked about today. Azure SQL is alive and well. Azure SQL Database for innovation and AI, Azure SQL VM for that quick lift and shift, Azure SQL managed instance that you saw feels and looks like a SQL server, but managed at scale. So we've got some resources for you here to kind of take a look at. Our team is going to be available at the hub to talk about all sorts of details for this. And don't forget that if you're thinking in terms of can I use SQL in an interesting and new way? I may be in an older SQL Server version. We have that for you. We have SQL Server now deployed, Fabric SQL Database, SQL Server 2025, Azure SQL, different options. Consistent story, still innovating. Thank you so much for your time today. Hope you enjoy the rest of Microsoft Ignite.